A mysterious model called Ox Alpha appeared out of nowhere. Qwen 3.827b is becoming one of the biggest local AI releases right now. A new 35BA3B model called Ornith claims to beat Qwen 3.6 in coding and agentic work. Hugging Face dropped a massive new coding dataset, and Anthropic is making a serious move from its coding success into science, biology, and drug discovery. Here's what happened in AI this week. Let's start with probably the strangest model release of the week. A new model called Ox Alpha suddenly appeared on OpenRouter. And we still don't officially know who made it. OpenRouter describes Ox Alpha as a stealth model operated by an anonymous third-party provider. There is no public company name, no parameter count, and no downloadable weights. But we do know what the model is targeting. Ox Alpha is specifically designed for coding, complex reasoning, and long-running agentic work. It also supports visual input and has a context window of more than 1 million tokens. And during this preview, it is completely free to use on OpenRouter. That's made Ox Alpha particularly interesting for people testing coding agents. But there is also a lot of speculation about where this model came from. People have been trying to identify it from its reasoning style, behavior, and output. You'll see theories connecting it to several different AI labs. But right now, none of those theories have been confirmed. So I am not going to tell you this is secretly GLM, Anthropic, Alibaba, or anybody else until we actually have evidence. For now, Ox Alpha is basically the mystery model of the week. And if you're using OpenRouter, you can already test it yourself. Now let's talk about the one I'm probably most interested in. Qwen 3.8-27b. The model technically arrived on August 14th, but the local ecosystem around it has been exploding since then. And this is an important release because Qwen managed to put a huge amount of capability into a model that is still realistically runnable on high-end consumer and workstation hardware. Qwen 3.827b is a dense model, not a mixture of experts. It is also natively multimodal, meaning it can work with text, images, and video. It supports reasoning, tool use, and long-running agentic tasks, and Qwen describes it as its most capable open model generation so far. The weights are released under Apache 2.0, and support is already available across the ecosystem. Transformers, VLLM, SGLang, and local tools and quantized versions are appearing all over Hugging Face. And that's one of the things I love about open models. A company releases the weights, and almost immediately the community starts making versions for different GPUs, different runtimes, and different hardware configurations. A model like this also makes the competition around local AI much more interesting. Because we're no longer talking about tiny models that are useful only because they're cheap. We're getting models that can seriously handle coding, reasoning, vision, and agents while still being something you can actually run yourself. And Qwen 3.8-27b is currently one of the most important examples of that. But Qwen already has competition. And this is one I definitely think local AI users should know about. Ornith 1.535BA3b. This is a mixture of experts model with around 35 billion total parameters, but only around 3 billion parameters are activated for each token. So instead of processing the entire 35 billion parameter network every time it generates a token, it routes the work through a much smaller part of the model. And according to Ornith's own published evaluations, the new model outperforms Qwen 3.635BA3b across all of the coding and agentic evaluations they report. I'm deliberately not going to throw a giant table of benchmark scores at you here. The interesting part is the architecture. You've got roughly the same class of model as Qwen 3.635BA3b. Similar active parameter count. But another team is showing that there is still a lot of performance left to extract from this size. Ornith is also a reasoning model and supports tool calling, which makes its focus very clear. Coding agents and real agentic workloads. And this is exactly the kind of competition I want to see in local AI. Qwen releases a strong architecture. Another team comes along and pushes that class of model further. Then Qwen responds. Then somebody else does it again. That's how the open model ecosystem moves so quickly. Now let's move from models to something that doesn't get nearly enough attention. Datasets. Because better models eventually need better data. And Hugging Face has now released the Stack v3, its newest massive open dataset for training code models. The really important change is that the Stack v3 is designed around entire repositories. Instead of treating every source code file like an isolated document, the dataset preserves the relationship between files inside a project. That is extremely important for modern coding AI. A real coding agent needs to understand that one class calls another class, that a configuration file affects something somewhere else, that changing one API may break 5 other files, and that an entire repository has structure. The Stack v3 is specifically built to make that kind of training possible. And the scale is enormous. The training version contains code from 173 million repositories across more than 700 programming languages. There was also an important correction this week. Hugging Face discovered a partitioning bug that had allowed exact duplicate files into the training set. They removed those duplicates and published version 3.1 of the dataset. And I actually like seeing this made public. Dataset quality matters massively. Throwing more tokens into a model isn't automatically better if you're repeatedly feeding it the same code. For anyone interested in training or continuing the pre-training of an open coding model, the Stack v3 is one of the most important datasets to watch. Microsoft also released something interesting for people training agents. It's called Agent Lightning version 1.0. This isn't simply another dataset. It's an open framework and training workflow designed to take an existing AI agent and improve it using reinforcement learning. And importantly, Microsoft released the surrounding pieces needed to reproduce the process. The data cleaning pipeline, training scripts, and an open workflow for training coding agents. That is important because training an agent is very different from simply instruction tuning a chatbot. The model has to learn what actions actually lead to successful outcomes. When should it use a tool? When should it inspect another file? When did its previous action fail? What should it try next? And until recently, doing serious reinforcement learning around these kinds of agent environments required a lot of infrastructure. Projects like Agent Lightning are making that process much more accessible. So while everybody watches the next model release, I'd also watch this layer very closely. Because the next big jump in local AI may not come purely from a larger base model. It could come from taking the models we already have and teaching them to become much better agents. Now we need to talk about Anthropic. Because something interesting is happening with Claude. Anthropic became massively successful in software development. Claude Code turned Claude into one of the biggest tools in AI-assisted programming. And Anthropic is absolutely not abandoning coding. Claude Code is still being actively developed. But the company is now making it increasingly clear that it wants to reproduce that success in another field. Science. And especially biology and drug discovery. Anthropic already launched Claude Science, a product built specifically around scientific research and life sciences. And this week, on August 18th, the company published a new Claude Science product guide, putting even more emphasis behind the product. This isn't just Claude with a different system prompt. The idea is to connect Claude to the scientific workflow itself. Scientific databases, research papers, analysis tools, code, biological data, and specialized scientific software. Anthropic wants researchers to be able to delegate increasingly large parts of their research process to Claude. And biology seems to be one of the company's biggest targets. And then Anthropic published something this week that shows why they're taking this seriously. They gave Claude access to protein design and protein folding tools and asked it to design completely new proteins capable of binding to specific biological targets. The important thing here is that these designs weren't only evaluated inside a computer. External laboratories actually synthesized Claude's designs and tested them physically. And Claude successfully produced working binders against almost every target Anthropic tested. This is still very far from Claude magically creating a finished drug. Protein binding is only one early stage in a much larger drug development process. But that isn't really the important part. The important part is that Claude wasn't just explaining biology. It was participating in an actual scientific workflow. Using tools, designing candidates, and producing outputs that scientists could manufacture and test in the real world. That's a completely different level of AI use. And I think this is the bigger story. Anthropic clearly saw what happened with coding. Code is perfect for AI because there is fast feedback. The model writes code. You execute it. It works or it doesn't. You fix it. You repeat. Dario Amodei has previously explained that this fast feedback loop was one of the reasons Anthropic was able to move so quickly with coding. Biology is much harder. Experiments can take days, weeks, or months. You need physical laboratories. You need specialized equipment. You need biological data. And eventually you need clinical trials. But Anthropic now seems to be trying to build the infrastructure necessary to shorten that loop. Amodei has repeatedly talked about AI accelerating biology and medicine, and just this week he argued that the AI industry eventually needs to stop merely promising things like curing cancer and actually deliver scientific breakthroughs. So I wouldn't describe this as Anthropic suddenly giving up on coding. It's something potentially much bigger. Coding was the first proof that Claude could become an expert-level work tool. Now Anthropic is trying to find out whether science can become the next one. And if they actually manage to create a Claude code for biology, that could eventually matter far more than generating software. And while Anthropic is pushing AI deeper into science, OpenAI had a very different kind of story this week. OpenAI revealed that it has changed how quickly it develops and trains some frontier models because their cybersecurity capabilities are becoming too serious to treat like normal evaluations. The company says its upcoming major model, Astra, may have reached what OpenAI calls its critical cyber capability threshold. OpenAI made that determination on August 7th and introduced additional monitoring requirements around Astra and tool use. OpenAI also described an earlier incident connected to an evaluation involving Hugging Face that showed why stronger isolation and monitoring were necessary. The important thing is not some sci-fi story that the AI escaped onto the internet. That's not an accurate description. The actual story is more interesting. Frontier models are becoming capable enough at cybersecurity that OpenAI now says it needs stronger containment, monitoring, and operational safeguards while training and evaluating them. And those safeguards aren't cheap. OpenAI says the monitoring alone can add significant compute overhead. So reaching an interesting point. More intelligence isn't only becoming more expensive because models need more GPUs. It can also become more expensive because the model is powerful enough that you need additional infrastructure simply to safely test it. So for me, the biggest theme this week is actually the speed at which the AI ecosystem is branching out. On one side, we have Ox Alpha, a completely mysterious frontier model appearing out of nowhere. Then Qwen 3.8-27b, pushing powerful multimodal AI further into hardware people can actually own. Then Ornith, showing that Qwen itself can be challenged by smaller open model teams. We're also getting better training data with the Stack v3 and more accessible agent training with Agent Lightning. And meanwhile, Anthropic is looking beyond the coding boom and making a serious bet that science and biology could become AI's next major breakthrough industry. At the same time, OpenAI is dealing with the opposite side of increasing capability. What happens when your models become powerful enough that even evaluating them starts requiring stronger security controls? Local AI is getting stronger. Agents are getting better. AI is entering real scientific workflows. And frontier models are getting harder to contain and evaluate. And all of that happened in basically 1 week. If this is the pace we're moving at now, the rest of 2026 is going to be wild. If you like, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and as always, thank you for watching. See you next time.